Firstly, thank you for joining this morning's call on Cyber Essentials Plus compliant applications. I'm Martin Sweeney, Technical Director of APPtechnology. I'm being assisted this morning by David Mays, Managing Director, so I will be on my best behaviour. We're looking to impart the knowledge that we have gleaned from 20 years of managing applications, OS and patching in large enterprises and presenting this in a methodology that can assist in your C+ application and patch compliant requirements. Looking at the attendees on this call, we have people whose organisations are already C+ certified, yeah, definitely, as well as those at the other end of the initial journey who want to understand the commitments needed to achieve C+ compliance. This presentation has been designed to include both starting positions in its approach. Before we start, just a little bit of housekeeping. Some of the following slides are busy. It may help if you could click the viewing options. It's a drop down in the top middle of your screen on this call. Go to page width or full width so that the details are more visible. During the presentation, we will gladly take questions. If you can type these in the QA box. I believe the QA submission option comes up when you hover your mouse in the bottom middle of the screen. And your submission is going to be seen by myself or David. We've also had some questions from attendees that were submitted in advance, and we'll cover these at the end of the presentation if we have time. If not, then we'll come back to you directly. Final housekeeping point, if you'd like a copy of these slides, then please just enter slides into the QA window and we'll sort it out for you. The scope for today is applications and patching. Cyber Essentials Plus does cover a wider remit to include networks, firewalls and devices, and obviously there is overlap there, for instance patching on devices, but we will be concentrating on meeting the CE Plus technical controls for application patch management. So let's have a look at the agenda. Introductions we've done, so that's one fewer slide you've escaped. We will look at Gartner's views, highlighting why Cyber Essentials Plus is important today, and we'll touch on the difference in approach from application and OS management cycles of the past. We'll also discuss the main technical controls for a CE Plus compliant approach, and we will cover what great looks like, and then what incredible looks like. We'll highlight the importance of a methodology for CE+ compliant application and patch management, and finally we'll cover the business outcomes of getting this right. In effect, how to make you look good and be a safer organisation. As a starter, let's look at why Cyber Essentials Plus is important to organisations today. These are the key Gartner predictions for cybersecurity risk, and I expect the first one impacts a lot of people on this call. CE+ has in effect become a minimum expectation for enterprise supply chains. The second point, the perception of cyber threats has changed from being seen as a technical threat to a recognised business risk. These threats have moved from general disruption to data theft and business interruption as their targets. And lastly, it's also predicted that performance against cybersecurity threats will be part of performance-related pay for executives in the next 4 years. So this is serious business. For APPtechnology, our CE+ certification is a requirement for government work, NHS, councils and central government, but it has also become a de facto requirement in any formal tenders. So having achieved CE+ certification wasn't just about our ability to tender for and win projects. The processes have also saved cold hard cash in licensing and managing OS migration cycles, which we'll come on to in a few slides. As a baseline for application security activity, you should really ask yourself, why wouldn't you pursue CE+ certification? Estimates suggest that following the technical controls will prevent around 80% of cyber attacks, which is a great starting point for any organisation. With the NCSC freely publishing baseline standards for the likes of Intune Win10 management, why would you not? So what are the main technical controls for application and patch management? Well, this slide covers the most impacting technical controls. It is a busy slide. The general showstopper is at the top, is the 14 days patching period, which is far faster than most enterprises are used to working at, with Apple patch assessment and deployment processes typically taking many weeks or months from start to finish. The CVSS level 7 or above score is interesting when you're looking at patch volumes. Level 7 equates to high or critical vulnerabilities. The current National Vulnerabilities Database for CVSS shows 30% of all vulnerabilities fall into this range of 7 or above. However, 60% fall into the medium vulnerability range. The reason to not include medium in C+ certification is probably because the challenge may just seem to be too great, with better being the C+ target rather than best. You need an audit trail for each application. Interestingly, passing a software scan isn't enough. You need an audit trail for every patch or application release or retirement. Your annual CE+ audit, even if you pass a security scan with flying colours, should ask to see the steps involved in the patch release process for successfully deployed applications or patches. So your audit trail here is key. You should also have a clear view of your organisation's progress towards achieving and maintaining patch targets, and visual reporting is highly recommended. As for scope, BYOD and home working devices are within the CE scope, assuming they have internet and/or corporate network access. Perhaps surprisingly, your outsourced web apps are in scope. So the outsourced SaaS-based HR database that has been held back due to internal Java plugin requirements can see you fail, even though you don't own the software. Interestingly, internally developed intranet web apps that are not internet-facing are out of scope, assuming they are not accessed from outside of the corporate network. The next is a big one. Out of support or unlicensed applications must be removed, or a provision made for management that prevents internet interaction to take them out of scope of the CE controls. And lastly on this hit list, we have turn on auto updates where possible. The question here is, when is possible acceptable to the business? For some basic apps from known and trusted vendors, then great, but do read the small print. Is your business going to accept that when an outage occurs due to an auto update event driven by a vendor, that you can do little but be caller X in the queue for a resolution? And for some mainstream apps, the approach and vendor provision changes may not sit well with you. Adobe Reader, for instance, with an enterprise update server requirement for the enterprise distribution, or the recent change to Reader requiring an Adobe user account to run, which is coming your way soon. As a CE+ certified organisation, we do ask ourselves regularly, would we be red-faced if we were audited tomorrow? Luckily, if struggling at the point of audit, there is some leeway in the approach. You have up to 30 days to rectify any vulnerabilities or shortfalls in the technical requirements. But we have seen some enterprises take years in addressing business critical application challenges, so this may not be long enough. The best practice approach is not to view CE+ certification as a once-a-year activity, but as a continual process of improvement. If you view CE+ as an annual car MOT, you could check your tyres a day before your next MOT and replace them if they are bald. However, you will have been driving around on bald tyres for months, subjecting yourself and your passengers to greater risk. This risk could have been removed if your daily processes was to glance at your tyre treads as you approached your car. It's this little and often approach that will reduce your vulnerability profiles. So what does a little and often approach look like? Well, it's a change from the way applications and patching have been managed in the past. This slide shows how enterprises have historically managed application, patch and image updates over the years compared to a Cyber Essentials approach. Enterprises have had a fairly static approach to software and patch management. Between OS migrations, application version changes were principally driven by feature requirements from the business or against a well-publicized critical vulnerability. Historically, application sprawl proliferated between migrations. You had multiple app versions appearing and divisional-owned applications grew. And there was a cycle of costly concerted effort to address these at the point of each OS migration. Time pressures generally forced less secure practices. We've seen the request to limit user rights at a migration multiple times, only to have a business critical application force admin rights globally, as it probably had done on the previous migration. Differing requirements on SAM, procurement, service delivery and IT support drove differing priorities and data sources, and often external help was needed to drive application rationalization decisions. And under CE+, of course, that all changes. There is a higher level of baseline activity required. Timescales for activity are dramatically reduced. Business approved processes replace waiting for application or patch management requests to arrive from the business. And ongoing monitoring and review of your estate is needed to show progress and to highlight vulnerabilities. So, it's a complex world, but what does a great CE+ aligned approach for an enterprise look like? Well, as a minimum, to achieve great, organizations should be meeting the following goals. Data sources should be monitored and reviewed at least weekly, covering application and patch installs in the environment. Do be aware that weekly reviews might be easier to schedule, but can mean that you've burnt through half of your remediation time before identifying further activity against the 14 days patch guidelines. End of life should be recorded for each application. You need to know and preempt the end of life for all applications in the estate. Decisions take time, and the business may need to adopt or change products. You need agreed triage pathways. For every relevant software update or patch, you need an agreed review process. We call it triage, against a set of rules. This goes beyond the CVSS rating and includes minor and major versions of software releases, whether future releases are desired, and whether the business has the capacity to meet the pilot or test requirements for CE+ driven activity. You need an audit trail for each decision. You need an audit trail for each software update or patch considered, irrespective of whether it's released or rejected. You need to prove your homework in effect. A CE+ audit can ask for the documented decision process you followed to release a critical patch that was needed. It won't just tick the box for having patched a vulnerability. New applications brought under management. Bringing any new applications under management by default is the smarter way to reduce software creep and the subsequent workloads to remove it. Graphical reports. We recommend that you make patch level reporting graphical and available to stakeholders via scheduled reporting, making this part of internal service reviews. And finally, have a rollback plan for every release and include the trigger point in your documentation. Shouldn't be a surprise. So that's what great looks like. Some of these approaches are tough or require a culture change, but how do you get from great to incredible? Well, to get to incredible, you really need to change user perception and increase business involvement. Some of the steps to achieve that are shown here. Proactive monitoring, live daily monitoring of your estate for new applications found and patch vulnerabilities identified. On the plus side, compared to doing this weekly, this potentially doubles the remediation time you have to react. New apps under management. Any application request is processed through release management and deployed, rather than approved for a business division or user to source and install. You should be undertaking ongoing rationalization. You need to rationalize the number of application versions in your estate continually. Removing multiple versions can be a pain and can impact licensing, certainly if you're consolidating license types. However, you reduce the number of applications you need to monitor and manage when a security relevant patch or minor software version is released. Remove version sprawl before it creates more work to remediate is the principle here. Now, real tough one, automated removal of unused applications. Now, technically, this is not a CE+ target, but this approach has multiple positive implications when run correctly. You reduce license count, you remove older and typically more insecure applications that are no longer needed by the business, and you have the ability to remove older frameworks that were needed for the older unused applications. You will need a removal approach anyway for unlicensed or out of support applications, so going this extra step should be more procedural than hard. The processes for Incredible have to be sponsored and understood by the business. These are processes that will improve your security and potentially save licensing costs. When a user complains that their old version of X has been removed, it is seen as a defendable value to the business rather than a user complaint. The user can probably have the latest secure version of the application deployed and under management pretty quickly, but it will disappear again if not used, assuming that the software isn't on a managed exceptions list or something. We suggest live management reports showing software sprawl or patch status. There's multiple ways of getting there depending on where you're starting from, and we have the ability to help in this area if needed. You need to let your users know that they are helping to secure their business, and that the annoying forced reboot, which is only sent out following suitable notifications which have been agreed and sponsored at executive levels, is there to protect them. Where forced reboots are seen as too intrusive on users, you will see higher patch failure rates as multiple patches are applied on top of each other without the required restarts. You need to involve and inform wider teams of your activity. This isn't just apps management. So given suitable process involvements, then security, networks, service delivery, and IT support work together. And you don't trip over the "why did you release that large application update on the weekend when we were replacing network devices" conversation. Always a tricky one. Image management. If you're managing your images, then update them regularly. Don't complicate your reporting and increase vulnerabilities by deploying out-of-date images that have known security patch requirements. Obviously, Autopilot and Intune help with this considerably, but do look to re-baseline your apps rather than deploy and patch. You need to know who is going to be impacted before a release. You should know exactly who will be impacted by any change, and you need to follow the agreed communications process, whatever you agree with the business. As a minimum, details of impacted users should be recorded in your audit trail, or at least the groups that they are part of. That's the easiest way of doing it. Lastly, be proactive on checking whether release is working. So patch and update deployments should have a known baseline of performance. Call it a deployment cadence. And this should be monitored to check that progress is within typical parameters. X gigabytes across Y users should be completed in Z hours. If not, then investigate. So how does Incredible happen? Well, we have a methodology to follow, gleaned from 20 years of undertaking these services for UK, European, and global enterprises. We've developed this methodology, ITRAM, consisting of sequential process stages and checklists that you can use to deliver great or even incredible service. We've developed this through a combination of best practice and experience distilled with a little added wisdom. We also have a best practices section for the initial policy setup within an organization, which can be used to drive ITRAM activity and its governance. We encourage enterprises to implement this methodology or a derivation of it to improve their CE+ compliance approach. For those of you that already have a running CE+ compliance service, then you can use this to review or authenticate what you have in place. Others may need some assistance in getting there. Either way, we're happy to share the detail. If you'd like a copy of our methodology, then great. Please simply enter checklist into the QA window in this presentation. We'll sort that for you. We can't cover all of the checklist points now. That really would be death by PowerPoint. But on this slide, we have listed the three key steps in each of the 5 stages. Under identify, you need to know your applications. You need to leverage audit tools using what you have or consider further tooling. Talk to us if you have a requirement. You need to know your sponsors and application stakeholders so that you're having the conversations with the right people and involving them in the right processes. And you need to create an end-of-life log covering every application. Under triage, you need to agree and follow rules to make this happen. decision options are already agreed, so deployments happen sooner. Everybody knows what that process is. You need to remove decision-making complexity. The rules that you set win when they're within a set parameter of, say, workload and licensing costs, for instance. You need to agree what is needed or wanted and document the process. On reporting, you should engage teams, users, and the business. Internal reporting should be freely available to stakeholders. You need to deliver a single version of the truth, graphically if possible. And you're looking to show improving compliance over time or highlight the need for change. All of your actions should be delivering repeatable quality standards to deploy updates. Each deployment follows the same quality path. Test or pilot becomes second nature to the business. It's not seen as an imposition. And documentation is updated to create audit path and reduce downstream costs. And lastly, monitor. Ensure your update rolls out as expected. Know your network KPIs. Document the anticipated signposts to track rollouts and react when they're not achieved, not after a more public failure of a rollout. And you need to share your activity and results with other teams. If you wanted some help with suggestions on how to implement the full list of activities in each stage, then we do offer a clinic, generally lasts about 45 minutes. Where at a high level, we review your existing processes, highlight areas for improvement, and consider options for things like automation. Once completed, we follow up with a gap analysis and recommendations for your personal review. So what business outcomes can you expect from putting all of this work into, it's hard work, into CE+ compliance? Well, this is where you can take the good news to the business, because business outcomes is what this is all about. Run properly, you'll see that you are protecting the business and reducing business risk. You're reducing the fear of loss, whether that's the fear of malicious activity impact or the fear of failing to meet customer certification requirements. Remember that you're stating that security is key to how you operate as an organization. Run properly, the business knows what is being achieved from the processes agreed, and your users understand the reasons for any impact or imposition. You are improving your organization's position to win business against others, or you're adding a professional stamp to your company's image. Neither is a bad thing. And your processes are reducing the software estate complexity and keeping it simple on an ongoing basis. And lastly, let's reiterate, although your CE+ audit is annual, just like a car MOT, do remember that crashing your car from bald tyres 11 months after your last successful MOT is not a defence. It is still a car crash. The CE+ certification isn't just a certificate, it's a way of operating safely with better security and fewer vulnerabilities. Sure, it carries a higher baseline of activity compared to the quiet years in between the monolithic OS migrations of the past decades, but given the business outcomes, why would you not? Last slide. We have a further reading slide here covering the stats used in this presentation. And now we have a few questions to address. I think one of these was supplied in advance, the other one during the presentation. Let me have a look. What's the best software for monitoring and patching that you recommend? We get asked this a lot. The answer isn't complex, but we recommend that you start with understanding what you already have. Our customers don't get to the size they are without having previously purchased audit tools or acquiring businesses that have differing systems. We often find that forgotten tooling or a lack of knowledge on existing capabilities means that the raw data sources are already available in-house. How these are used is the clever part. We have solutions that can analyze and present the required business information from the data sources that you already have. Saying that, if you have nothing, we can assist in identifying the correct balance of tooling, cost and administration for you. We work with most tools, so we have a great view of And one QA, do we do C+ certifications? Good question. So we are C+ certified, but we made a choice to be providers of application and patch management services rather than auditors. In effect, we decided not to mark our own homework. We do work with two very professional organisations in this space, but we decided not to be a member of the IASME consortium of auditors. I think that's it for the QA questions. So yeah, so to wrap up, I would like to thank you for your time today. Hopefully you have picked up a few nuggets of wisdom that help or better understand the CE+ technical control requirements. Please let us know if you'd like a copy of our ITRAM checklist materials. As said, just enter checklist into the QA window or contact myself directly. My email address is on this last slide. And just to restate that we do offer a 45-minute clinic to discuss and brainstorm your challenges in this area, free of charge. So please reach out if you'd like to discuss lead times on a clinic. And beyond that, thank you for your time today. Have a great day and goodbye.